Hello, my name is Aaron Hathaway. I'm a Technical Services Manager with Nufarm. Today we're going to talk about premium non-selective weed control. We're going to talk about Cheetah Pro and SureGuard SC in particular. So Cheetah Pro is glufosinate. You'll see glufosinate, ammonium. Sometimes you'll just hear glufosinate, but we're talking about glufosinate and it sounds very similar to glyphosate. So don't get those two confused because they look and they sound fairly similar. But they are different. We'll talk about the differences, and right here we have some of them. Glufosinate, you're going to see symptoms within 2 to 5 days, which is different from glyphosate. Can take much longer than that before you see any symptoms from glyphosate. Both of these products are non-selective, so any green plant on which you apply them, you're going to, the goal is to kill them, but you're going to see injury on them. Now the movement within the plant, this is the key to non-selective herbicides. And really, when we talk about alternatives to glyphosate, there's nothing that we have available to us that's the same. And really what sets glyphosate apart from every other herbicide is how well it translocates and the fact that it does it non-selectively. So you can apply it to any green plant. It's going to translocate really well through that plant. Works well on viney plants, perennial plants, annual plants. Glyphosate just translocates so well that everybody is always expecting to kill 100% of the weeds on which they apply this herbicide. Now, Cheetah Pro, and we're going to talk about the fact that Cheetah Pro is the best alternative to glyphosate, but it is a little bit different at the same time. It is limited in movement in the plant, in the xylem and the phloem. So it will move, which is good. It's good news that it will move, because the more movement we have throughout the plant, the better kill or control that plant will have. But this movement is limited. But everything's relative. We're going to talk about the other alternatives that are possible for glyphosate, and we're going to talk about why Cheetah Pro is better than those. You see the difference in the modes of action. That kind of speaks to resistance to glyphosate, because it's been used ubiquitously for so long everywhere. There are many species that have been documented as resistant weed species, and with glufosinate there's been much fewer plants, and that's a good thing, since if we're going to move to more glufosinate products, there are many fewer plants that are resistant or have been documented to be resistant to this herbicide. And you see a couple other differences as well that aren't quite as important. But one important thing, and I mentioned this earlier, but just to help you or kind of build an illustration for you of what I'm trying to say, is that glyphosate translocates really well. So you see those green arrows. You're going to apply it to a plant. That plant's going to take it up. It's going to start moving that material throughout the phloem, throughout that plant, into vegetative parts, into roots, into stems, everywhere throughout that plant. And so glyphosate has 3 letters that go below that red line, so that to help you remember that that herbicide moves well. It moves well into the soil, into those vegetative parts that may be where you didn't actually get to apply the herbicide. That's a good thing. You need that translocation for good control. Now, glufosinate, on the other hand, it will move within the plant, but less. And you see that glufosinate has 1 letter that goes below that red line, again, to help you remember the difference between these 2 active ingredients, or the main difference between them, is that glufosinate gives you some translocation, but not to the extent that glyphosate did. And what that means for you end users out there is that if you have very mature plants, if you have a stand of weeds that's 10 inches in height, they're mature, there's many vegetative parts, glyphosate can often do a very good job controlling those plants, sometimes even up to 100%. Glufosinate may have a tougher time translocating through bigger, more mature plants and completely killing them, especially if they're perennials, because that movement in the plant is a little bit less. But I do want to talk about why glufosinate is the best alternative for glyphosate. So if you look at both of these treatments side by side, this is 24 hours after a glyphosate treatment, so the bottom of this column, and then a month later after a glyphosate treatment. This is what it looks like. So you can see that the injury was slow to come on. You started to see it about a week out, and then a month later those plants were still dead, right? They're still necrotic. So those grasses and those broadleaf weeds in this particular trial site were not able to draw upon enough sugars and produce more foliage. They were actually killed by the glyphosate. we want to look for the exact same thing from glufosinate. Again, we don't see injury in 24 hours quite, but we're looking for this longevity, or not longevity, but if it's actually killing the plants and not just kind of burning down that foliage. We see a month out that glufosinate is providing complete control of many of those plants, similar to glyphosate. Now let's look at some other possible alternatives to glyphosate. These are true contact herbicides, which means they contact the foliage of the plant and then they're not taken up. They don't move within the plant. They just break down and cause disruption in the cells of those parts of the plant that they actually contact when you spray them. Now here's a big difference. You can see the injury is very quick. Often when you spray products like vinegar, which is 5% acetic acid, or pelargonic acid, you can see injury within hours after making that application. You still see that injury a week later, but let's move all the way to a month out. And what you notice is that almost all of it's recovered, which means because it didn't translocate, you didn't actually kill those plants. You just caused a lot of injury, that burn effect. You burned that foliage, but that plant had enough resources, enough sugars to push back new green foliage a month later. Even about 2 weeks, 2 weeks later, you could see recovery. Just to further illustrate this point, this is Cheetah Pro at 2 fluid ounces per 1,000 square feet versus a dandelion plant, right? Dandelion plants can be actually very difficult to control because they're perennials, they're simple perennials, and they have often, if they're mature, a very big taproot in which they've stored many carbohydrates. So you can, even with a translocating herbicide, have trouble controlling dandelions because they have access to so many sugars. So this is on the left, the day of treatment. And you can see they put a can on one side of that dandelion and only sprayed the foliage on the other side. So they left the can there, they sprayed that so that where the can was, the spray of Cheetah Pro didn't contact those other plants. And you see 4 days after treatment, a lot of injury, a lot of necrosis on those leaves that were treated. And then on the left side where that can was, really no injury at all 4 days after treatment. So you see that it's not translocating all that quickly, but it is causing pretty fast visual effects 4 days after treatment. Here's again at treatment on the left side, and then 11 days after treatment. And what you see is to the left of where the can was, remember 4 days after, it didn't look like there was any injury, but now you see that movement is starting to occur. It's starting to make its way over to the other side of that plant through the foliage and causing damage to the other leaves of this plant. So again, just to illustrate that there is some translocation when you're applying glufosinate, whereas with pelargonic acid or with vinegar, those true contact herbicides, something like diquat even, there's zero translocation. You're going to burn down whatever part of that plant that is contacted by the spray. Now, here's the rub with glufosinate or Cheetah Pro. We can burn down the foliage, but that doesn't necessarily mean we've killed the entire plant. You can see on the right, this is 45 days after treatment. If you cut that root open or that crown of the plant, there's still healthy white roots. This plant is probably going to be able to push up new foliage after this. This is even something we'll see if you spray 2,4-D on some dandelions. You may think you've killed it, but often a couple months or a month and a half later, it'll push up new foliage. So this is nothing new, but glyphosate is much more likely to translocate really well on mature, especially perennials, that have access to a lot of sugars like a dandelion has with this taproot. Glufosinate can move some, which means it can have a better chance at killing plants than those true contacts will, but not quite as good of a chance that glyphosate always has or always will have. So this is pretty typical if you're going to make a glufosinate treatment, though. It does really well in landscape beds. Because in landscape plant beds, we're dealing mostly with annual plants. We're usually dealing with weeds before they get too mature, before they're too big, before they really have produced much vegetation. And annuals aren't producing much vegetation or have very deep roots in the first place. And so glufosinate works really well in this situation. You can see both Finale and Cheetah Pro providing excellent control 14 days after treatment. Did a good job really killing all of those plants. So we kind of want to move to a mixture now. We talked about Cheetah Pro, how well it works, what a great alternative to glyphosate it is. but it gets even better when you start mixing it with something like SureGuard SC. SureGuard SC's strength is pre-emergence control. It's going to reside in that soil and provide pre-emergence control of any plant that's going to germinate, hit that barrier, and die. And so this is a common mixture, Cheetah Pro plus SureGuard SC. And the other awesome thing that SureGuard SC provides is help on the post-emergence side. So glufosinate or Cheetah Pro is all post-emergence. It's going to translocate some. You're going to get that fast visual effect. But when you add SureGuard SC, which can provide post-emergence control of small plants on its own, you get a little bit faster effect, and you can get a little bit better control of some smaller weeds when you mix these together. At the same time, you're putting down that pre-emergence barrier for any weed that wants to germinate and survive in that stand. So you're going to save labor without really having to come back and make another application. SureGuard SC is going to provide a lot of weed control for you while you're away from that particular site. Just some pictures. When you mix SureGuard SC with non-selective herbicides, this particular picture was mixed with glyphosate. So this is April 28th. This is on the day of application, just before they made the application. You can see plenty of fairly mature weeds, which glyphosate does really well on. Just 5 days after treatment, you can see SureGuard is helping with that post-emergence control, especially visually. If this was glyphosate on its own, you might see zero injury at this point. Sometimes you have to wait 7 days before you see anything at all. SureGuard helps with that. And then 5+ months after treatment, you're seeing just completely bare ground. No weeds have really survived. Those that have tried to germinate as annuals or any seeds that were in the soil that tried to germinate were controlled as it hit that SureGuard SC barrier and weren't able to survive. So the non-selective herbicide did most of the work early, and SureGuard is there 5+ months later doing the work for the applicator for a long time afterwards. And that's really what you want from a pre-emergence herbicide. And then to talk a little bit more about this mixture of Cheetah Pro and SureGuard in landscape beds, you see Cheetah Pro and Finale, those are both glufosinate products. 56 fluid ounces of Cheetah Pro and 128 fluid ounces of Finale. Those are equal amounts of glufosinate. Both of those are 1 pound of glufosinate per acre. You can see that all of these treatments, both Cheetah Pro and Finale, and also Cheetah Pro plus SureGuard, they're mixed with AMS or ammonium sulfate. This is a really good tank mix partner with glufosinate. Because glufosinate been around a long time and been used in agriculture, we know a lot about it, and they've found that adding AMS can really boost efficacy when you mix it. And so you want to put this in the tank first at about 2 pounds per acre. The other thing I want to mention about this trial is that this weed growth stage was 2 to 5 inches in height. So these plants are primed to be controlled by something like glufosinate, typical of what you'd find in a landscape bed. It's May 21st in Michigan. This was done in 2019. Weeds in the site were many, lots of broadleaf weeds, some of them perennial, most of them annuals like you would find in landscape beds like this. There's turf grass around this site, so you'll see that it's not going to move off site after you apply it, whether it's been mixed with SureGuard or not. And it was directly applied. So there are some ornamental grasses in the site, but it was applied around it when necessary. Cheetah Pro in the middle, providing excellent control 14 days after treatment. You saw some of these pictures earlier. Finale, you see a couple of weeds, some fine fescue in there in the Finale plot in particular. That's one instance where you have a perennial plant that has deep roots, many sugars. It was unable to really kill it with one application. And that's a typical thing you'll find if you have mature perennial plants in a site like this. But often in landscape beds, you won't find any perennial plants like that, and mostly annuals that are haven't put much energy into a root system, haven't put sometimes zero energy into vegetative parts. So they're more easily controlled by something that doesn't translocate as well as glyphosate. Then on the far left, you see Cheetah Pro plus SureGuard SC. You see how clean that plot is. Nothing survived in that plot. Remember, SureGuard's going to help with that post-emergence activity. And then here's really where the rubber meets the road. So this is, again, 14 days after treatment. If we look at those plots from afar, they all look pretty clean. All of those weeds have been burned down, but if we look at them up close, just 14 days after treatment, we see something very different. So if we take a little segment of that second rep of Cheetah Pro, we look closely and we see a lot of annuals, some broadleaf, some crabgrass germinating and surviving in those plots, which is very typical in these landscape beds. We look at finale in the second rep again, just a small section. We see again a lot of annuals popping up in this area. But if we look at Cheetah Pro plus SureGuard SC, look at a small section, we see 0 plants, probably many germinated, but once they hit that barrier and take up that SureGuard SC, they don't survive. And so this is what something like SureGuard provides. Probably not surprising to see this, but it's cool to see it in action, to see what's really happening when you mix these two products together. And it saves you a lot of labor, saves you a lot of time, because you don't have to go and revisit these sites to spray another post-emergence herbicide. This is 24 days after treatment. Cheetah Pro and Finale, you're starting to get a lot of growth of annuals that have popped up in those particular plots, especially crabgrass. Cheetah Pro with SureGuard, the SureGuard is providing residual control, and so really completely clean. And then the untreated, those weeds are starting to get very mature. 57 days after treatment, so almost 2 months. SureGuard SC plus Cheetah Pro still providing excellent control. Remember, this is definitely a worst case scenario. There was no mulch here. There was no previous weed control in this particular site at all. So lots and lots of weeds coming into this site because there's plenty of weed seed in that soil and no mulch to cover any of this. And so definitely a worst case scenario, but Cheetah Pro and SureGuard mixed together still providing some control. And just for that faster control, so you can visually see that, you see 7 days after treatment, everything's burned down for sure. But even 2 days after treatment, you can see that there's some chlorosis on those weeds, which people like to see that fast efficacy. And when you mix SureGuard, Cheetah Pro on its own, you'll start to see injury at about 4 days, sometimes 3 days. SureGuard gives you a little bit faster visual control or visual injury when you mix it with Cheetah Pro. So usage rates, apply Cheetah Pro at about 3.5 pints per acre. That's the same as 56 fluid ounces per acre. With 10 fluid ounces per acre of SureGuard SC, that's a great mix for post-emergence control of annuals and landscape beds. Smaller plants up to 6 inches in landscape beds, that's going to be a great mix for post-emergence control of them. And then a long residual for pre-emergence control in that area at the same time when you mix those two products together. Awesome combination, so it saves end users time, saves them money, so they don't have to go back and visit those plots. When you mix them together, you get faster post-emergence control than non-selectives alone, and you get a very broad spectrum of both post-emergence and pre-emergence control of tough broadleaf and grassy weeds. And then we see a lot of weeds that are resistant to glyphosate, but when you're mixing these two different chemistries together, one's a PPO and the other glufosinate is different from glyphosate, so you're going to run into less resistance, especially when you're mixing these two products together. So again, Cheetah Pro and SureGuard SC, this is Nufarm's solution for a lot of these landscape beds, areas where you want to keep weeds out and provide post-emergence control at the same time. Awesome combination. Thanks so much for listening, being a part of this webinar. If you have any questions, you can visit us on our website. You can contact your local Nufarm sales rep, or you can email me. My name's Aaron Hathaway. Email me at Aaron, that's AARON, .Hathaway, HATHAWAY, @nufarm.com. Thank you.